What's up, hobby friends? For the past couple of weeks, we've been spending a lot of time in Photoshop, learning how to work through a lot of our basic tools and the basic workspace of Photoshop. And we're going to start putting this all together in a practical manner. We're going to start looking at how we can use Photoshop in our hobby. And in this video, we're going to cover how to modify existing images to create custom color schemes or to create concepts of color schemes that we want to do. So I want to paint the Silent King for my army. And I'm not quite sure what areas or what parts I want to paint in what color. Now, I have an existing color scheme in mind. I have my existing Necrons, so I'm going to go ahead and just drop that into this Photoshop layout, and I'm going to use that as my color reference to grab colors from. And so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take an existing image that's pulled off of Games Workshop's site, and it can be on a white background, it can be on a colored background with an image behind it. It really doesn't matter. We're really only going to focus on the image itself. I like when the image has a plain white background. It makes it a little easier to edit and to actually proof the colors without any sort of distracting background affecting how we perceive the values. I also want to preface that there's no set way to do this. There's no right or wrong way. The main way that we're going to be approaching this is using adjustment layers, and really, like any tool in Photoshop, it's all on how we use them. There are so many different possibilities and so much depth to this tool that really the sky's the limit. Once you become familiar with how to use these adjustment layers, you can start going crazy with them and doing these wild and awesome things. So the first thing I want to do, because I like non-destructive editing, and to make sure that I don't accidentally change these base images, I'm just going to go ahead and right-click on each layer, and I'm going to convert them to a smart object. Now what this allows me to do is it'll allow me to, most importantly, resize without reducing the image quality, because it's created an instance of itself, as it were. And if we were to go ahead and right-click and edit the contents, and save it, you can see that it reflects in this smart object. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to rename that to command bar. Okay, let's put those side by side. So the first step that I want to see is how can I adapt what Games Workshop has already painted towards my existing colors. So for example, in this case, the green energy is going to be equivalent to the blue energy that I have on my walkers. The black portions will be black, and then any silver elements on the palanquin or the dais will probably end up being my ivory white. So I'm going to try adjusting those and then start tweaking the colors based on what I need. One of the most important questions that I need answered is how can I tackle this black stone? Games Workshop has used this two-tone green for the energy and then sort of a teal turquoise for the blackstone. Now, that's not really something that I've done in anything in my own army, and I don't want to paint the blackstone the same blue as I paint the energy. I feel like that would be a little too much of the same color. It would be too monochrome. So that's probably going to be the first thing that I try and play around with and tweak as I adjust the colors. So to create an adjustment layer, we're going to go down here to our layer menu, and similar to our trash, our new layers, and our folders, we have this two-tone circle. It allows us to create a new fill or adjustment layer. So clicking that will bring up a menu. It gives us a bunch of options, and clicking any of them, I'm just going to click hue saturation. You can see that it brings up a hue and saturation layer right above in our layer menu, and this is what's called an adjustment layer. The layer itself has no contents. The entire thing is adjusting the hue and saturation of anything beneath it, or if we parent it, anything that the layer is parented to. Just like a layer, it also has a mask attached to it that we can use to show or hide, and we'll cover that as we dive into it. So the first thing I want to do is start playing around with these sliders, and you can see that it's really adjusting everything on the image, changing the hue, or if I really wanted to adjust the saturation or the lightness. Defaults, and because it's sitting on top of our Szerakh layer and not our command bar layer, anything we do to this only impacts everything beneath it. If I were to move the command bar layer underneath, you can see that it's now been impacted. Just like any smart object as well. If I parent it to Szerakh, you can see it affects only the Szerakh layer. Now, one of the benefits, like I mentioned, of using a white background, it's much easier to do our tweaks without having to mask out any background elements. Most adjustment layers, apart from maybe darkness or lightness in this case, has no impact on white. For example, right? We can't change the hue or saturation of pure white because it's white. There's no color to it. We can't desaturate it or oversaturate it. So it makes it easier and cleaner to tweak our image values. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start adjusting the blue. So anything that's green in this image, we're going to tweak towards our blue energy. So we're going to try using our hue and saturation as an initial adjustment. Okay, so that's fairly similar. I might be a little too saturated. There. So that's fairly similar to how I've painted the blue energy orbs and blades of my Necrons, and I like that, but I want to only apply it to the green elements. So to do this, we're going to be using our masks. Masks, if you think of them like when we paint a miniature, of using masking tape or using masking liquid, the goal of a mask is to hide or show elements of a layer. So in this case, our hue and saturation adjustments, it'll hide or show using the mask. When the mask is pure white, it's showing everything, and when it's black, it hides everything. So if I were to fill the mask black, you can see that it's now hidden everything from view. Everything on the masking layer has been turned off. And similarly, if we were to bring it back to white, it shows everything. A mask layer, just like a regular layer, can be painted on with a brush. So if we were to fill it black, and for the brush, we're just going to use a basic brush, hard round with pressure for size. Actually, no, I think we're just gonna go hard round, straight up. We're gonna zoom in, and with our brush on white, we're gonna start brushing in where the green is. And you can see that as I'm brushing into the masking layer, the white is revealing the hue adjustments that we were making, only where I'm painting the white. If I were to switch back to black, I can then erase it. And the most tedious part of this step is making sure that you've gotten all of the green elements in your first pass. But if you miss anything, it's not a big deal. This is just a proof of concept, and so it doesn't have to be perfect. We're really looking just to ballpark an image that allows us to guesstimate how we want to approach painting the miniature. Cool. So we've gotten all of the green turned into our turquoise. However, it's a little dull. I take a lot of these energy highlights almost to pure white, and I want to adjust the brightness of this, or the levels of these, to bring in some of that white so that the brightness of my paint job will accurately reflect. So once again, we're going to go into our adjustment layers, and we're going to create a levels. Levels is useful for adjusting our mid-tone highlights and shadows, and for really upping the contrast. Now, I've already spent all this time painting and masking off on my hue saturation layer for all the blue energy elements, and I don't want to go and mask them again every single time I do a new adjustment layer. So what I can do is holding down Alt, I can click and drag my mask onto my levels and replace the layer mask with a duplicate of the mask for my hue and saturation layer, and that's as easy as that. I don't have to repaint the mask every single time. I can do it once and just keep adding layers and duplicating the layer mask. And so now when I adjust the levels, you can see that it only impacts what I've painted that, or what I've adjusted with my hue and saturation already. Okay, I like that. And we're going to quickly do a color tweak on the base to get the red accurately reflected. Now, because the base itself is a fairly desaturated gray tone, I know from experience that I can't really up the hue or saturation without really changing the way the colors are going to look or behave. It's going to create some weird artifacts in the shadows and highlights that won't accurately reflect the color. So what I'm going to go ahead and do instead is I'm going to color grab an approximate red tone from the reference image I've grabbed. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and adjust the layer blending mode to color. And then much like with the masking, we're going to create a new layer mask for this, and the mask will behave just like our adjustment layers. We're going to fill it black, and we're going to paint in the tops of our bases. So what I did there was I just rotated my canvas in Photoshop using the rotation tool. It's called R. It's actually a very useful tool that's not available in Paladin. I like it because it allows me to rotate the entire canvas like I would a piece of paper. And when I'm drawing, just like if I were drawing on a piece of paper or canvas, it allows me to rotate the entire thing without having to like start drawing at a weird angle and like strain my wrists or hurt myself. I'm gonna quickly save this just in case, and this is a good habit to get into. Always make sure that you save your files. You don't want to lose your work and find out that you have to redo everything from scratch. Make sure that we're painting. So obviously when you switch layers, you want to make sure that you're always painting in your mask when you're doing this and not back into your original layer. Otherwise, you'll end up changing the color that you're using to apply. Now, one of the reasons I also like using adjustment layers or color layers or layers with different blending modes to do all these edits as opposed to editing the original image itself. So the problem with editing the original image itself is if you don't like what you've done, well, you've changed the image. It becomes very hard to go back and tweak specific changes. That's what I like to call destructive editing or destructive art. And it's difficult to iterate or to play around with different ideas. Once you've made a change, you sort of locked yourself in. It's difficult to go back in and undo a change without undoing a lot of extra work. Whereas using smart objects and adjustment layers, this thing called non-destructive editing allows us to make these changes. It allows us to iterate and tweak. And if we want to adjust one specific element, or if we're unhappy with a change, to go back in and adjust only that element without adjusting everything else. So now that I've gotten the red base tone, I'm going to go ahead and inject some of this orange. Once again, duplicating our mask. And like I mentioned before, there's no set way to go about doing this. There's no right or wrong. It's a matter of experimentation and playing around until you achieve the look you want. fairly close to approximate to the orange color I want. I'm okay with that. Once I'm sure that I've adjusted one particular part of the image and I want to keep it organized, I'll probably just group a lot of my layers so that I can turn them on or off, or if I need to tweak the adjustment, I know where to grab my stuff later. So let's go ahead and do the same for this. So we're going to leave the black dais elements black for now, and I'm not sure if I want them to be gold or silver. I'll leave them for now. The next thing we're going to tackle is doing the white ivory armor. So once again, we're going to color grab some of this, something from the model I've painted. Create our mask, black it out, and then make sure that we're painting in our mask with white. We're going to paint over the armor elements. Now, in my models, I have specific elements like glyphs and runes painted in gold. I'm not going to worry about those when I'm creating my reference. You can. It's a detail that if you really want to tackle, you're more than welcome to try and put into work. For myself, because this is really a proof of concept, I want to try and be quick with this. I'm really looking to block in a lot of the larger elements, specifically the armor, where I'm going to be placing or painting it white, as well as how the blackstone and the blue energy will interact. So those are the main questions I want answered. That's why I'm doing this, and that's what I'm really going to focus on with this image. And one reason I like modifying something that's already been painted, particularly if I know the piece looks good and I think that the original model has a good balance in terms of placement of color, its color scheme and everything. They've already done a lot of work in terms of how they want the different elements of the image balanced in terms of what's painted what color where. And so that takes the guesswork or that think work out of how you're going to paint the model. Really, you're looking at tweaking the colors. It sometimes can be useful to have to adjust or change colors of certain elements to different colors depending on what you want. Say, for example, you don't want a certain element to be black. I want it to be a white armor instead. Then it becomes a little more of an involved process, and I'll try and get into that as we move along in this process. But this is easy stuff, just tweaking colors are already on the model to get the look that we want. All right, now that we've got the base color, it's time to start tweaking some of our lights and shadows. So one of the issues I know is because they've painted the elements I want to paint the armor in, they've done it in a silver metallic. It does create these super rich highlights because of the lighting that they've used to photograph the model. It's creating these extreme bright spots. It's making it a little challenging to color correct. That's sort of where the fun of this process is. So when you're adjusting levels, something really important to note, up top adjusts the impact of the actual shadows, midtones, and highlights. So moving this dial to the left, or to the right, sorry, let's reset this, increases how dark your shadows are. Moving your highlights to the left increases how bright your highlights go. And the midtones affects your midtones to the right darker, to the left brighter. This bottom dial adjusts the strength or I guess impact of your lights and darks. Basically what it's saying is like in the original image, your dark is dark. It's going to tweak it so that the darkest color code ends up shifting this way. Everything brightens up along the way. So when you move the darkness dial to the right, it's increasing all of the values up relative to each other. Similarly, when you move the brightness dial to the left, it's decreasing all of its values relative to each other. So as we're adjusting this dial, if we find the shadows are a little too dark, we might want to just bump this dial in to brighten everything up. Okay, so that's cool for now. And then the big thing that we want to adjust is the blackstone parts, mainly on the menhirs, but he has some blackstone elements on the dais as well. Now, because we don't know what color we want to change them into, we need to start and create our mask first. So I'm very just roughly going to create a saturation layer, and I'm just going to push it to some extreme color so I know what I'm working with. So I'm going to bump it to red so that I know when I go to create my mask, once I've properly masked everything out, it'll be revealed as red. And then we can once we've properly masked it, we can then start going in and adjusting the specific colors of what we want. So right now this is more just for visibility. I don't actually want the blackstone to be red, I don't think. This is just to see what I'm masking. Now there is an option if you press the, I'm not sure if it's the backward or forward slash, it looks like this on your keyboard. It shows you the quick mask mode. This is another way to see what you're painting. The red is obviously going to be your black, so that's what's hidden. And when you paint in the white, it reveals. You hit the backslash again or the forward slash again, it hides the quick mask and you're back editing your masking layer. There's different ways of looking at the same information. Now a neat trick as well, because we already have, and I'm just going to neaten up, that's fine. Because we already have the armor and the blue energy already masked off, there's no reason to have to paint neatly to avoid those elements. So I'm just going to quickly brush over the menhirs, and I'll show you a neat trick that you can use to take advantage of other masks you've done to erase back. So we've quickly painted off, but we've seen that our brush strokes have carried over onto the blue elements and onto the white armor. If we go ahead to our blue energy and we just control click the mask, you can see that it selects the mask for the energy elements. We can then go back to our blackstone mask, switch over to black, and we can paint in these elements and it'll erase them, helping us neaten it up. Deselect similar with the armor. We can control select the armor mask and we'll just with back quickly erase our overpaint. It's just a neat way to move a little quickly in the program. Now that we have our blackstone properly masked, it's now time to start adjusting the colors or playing around with the colors to see what we like. It'd be pretty funny if it ended up being red that we wanted to go with. Not sure if that's quite the intensity I want. I really like the way that purple turns out, so I think we've figured out our blackstone color. So I'm looking at his attendants and himself now. I don't mind him being in a bit more of this silver gold color, but I think I might want his attendants to just be silver. And that's a pretty easy fix. We're just going to create a new hue saturation. We're just going to desaturate them. Now the shoulder pads will end up being the same white armor color as this, which is approximate to this. So I'm going to leave them untouched. It's fairly close. And then because my silver is sort of this black metal silver, it's got a huge amount of punch to it. Let's quickly tweak the levels. I'm also curious how he turns out actually now. Not a huge fan of the color of the cape. And I think I still want him gold, so I'm just going to unmask this. Just going to color grab this purple. I want to see what his cape will look like in that color. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just quickly painting in where his cape is going to be. And then we're going to go ahead and mask it off. And then carefully paint in our mask. Now again, this is a challenging model to color adjust because it seems like they put metallics into a lot of the colors, and metallics don't photograph well. They have extreme brights and extreme darks. It can make it tricky sometimes to accurately color correct. I will do the best I can. Okay. The last step, I think, for this proof, for this stage where I'm at, the black armor has some of this green reflection in it that's happening, and I want to just quickly tweak that to reflect the blue that we have in our energy orbs. And then similarly in the blackstone around these energy orbs, it's a dark purple that's being reflected, but that's not actually the color we want. I want to tweak that. Okay, so for our first pass, this is not bad. I can already see that there are going to be some problem areas with this model in terms of the values of the contrast I want. I think the cape will definitely have to be toned down a touch when I paint it. I want it to be closer in value to the menhirs. I could go in and hand paint it if I really wanted it to. Right now in Photoshop, just to get a sense more of what I want. In my own, like, a lot of the newer Indominus characters have these tassels on them, and across the board, I've almost painted them all black. And I think the gold on these, I'm not a huge fan of, so I'm actually going to turn them back to black as well. And I still don't think, or I think I could tweak the white armor a touch more. So the problem I'm having, I'm looking at it now, the attendants get really lost in the dais. I think there's a lot of black happening here, and I'm trying to mentally figure out as part of my creative process, as I do, how I can break this up. I'm wary if I want to paint these handrails white as well. Or if I want to paint this element over here white. I definitely want it to be very black in this central area. It does help to contrast Szerakh very well. It definitely pops him out. I just worry that this becomes sort of a lot of nothing. One thing I do as well is I add a lot of these blue energy lines into sort of the runes that are on the model. And I think that's actually what's missing. There's a lot of detail here that's not being properly shown that I usually accentuate with this blue. So I'm actually going to go ahead and paint that in, and we'll see how that looks. So I'm just going to use my brush, and I'm just going to pick out a lot of these lines, maybe push it a little more towards the blue. Now, in this proof of concept, I'm really just approximating what's going to be here. Obviously, when I go and paint the model, it's not going to be 100%, but it's close. And then it'll be a similar thing on the attendant. Actually, I'm going to put this on a separate layer. We're going to call this glowy runes. I know they've got some stuff here, so I'm just going to approximate. We'll see some splashes of color there. Parent it just in case I overbrush, and we're just going to dot some highlights. Some of these brighter spots. And then because I know not all of these areas, especially in these shadow portions, are going to be as bright, we're just going to go ahead and I think we'll just use a mask to help erase some of these elements. I'm just going to use a gradient tool. And we're just going to gradient in some black to create a black to white gradient. And what that's going to do is, because the gray, it's sort of in between the black and white. If black is hiding and white is showing, completely at 100%, gray is a degree of hide or show. So if it was 50% gray, for example, it would, depending on how you look at it, be either only showing half or hiding half. It's a good way to fake these transitions and sort of give the illusion that it's hidden in shadow. I actually think that looks much better. Much better. If I do glowy runes here as well. I like this because it looks like the power is bleeding from the orb and filling these cracks in the blackstone with energy. Now, like any good light source, we don't want the runoff to be brighter than the original. Chances are I'm actually going to take these brighter, so I'm just going to use a white gradient and push them closer to how I think I would actually paint them. And I can gradient out some white from the center. And then to simulate the fade, I'm going to use my black gradient again and just reduce these. And then because the men here have orbs on the top and bottom, I sort of want this energy orb coming in on both ends. So I'm actually going to gradient in between. And I'll repeat that for the other side. It's funny because I'm recording this and I'm literally verbalizing my thought process. And it may sound weird like I'm talking to myself, but this is how I think in my brain as I'm going through this creative process. I'm questioning or I'm asking all these questions internally and then answering them on the screen. And it's very cool to see it translate. And it'll just be funny for the viewer because you get to hear me talking to myself. Think out loud. And there you go. That's my proof of concept for Szerakh. I actually really like the way this will turn out. I think the colors work very, very well together. And I think the runic elements, or brightening up the runes, especially in the black armor elements, will help add that bit of color and contrast without taking away from the focus of Szerakh and without adding too much color into his dais to draw attention away from him and his followers. Now all that's left is to actually take this and translate that into my paint job. So you can see it's not terribly, I don't want to say it's not difficult because obviously there is a steep learning curve to it, but a lot of it is experimentation and understanding how layers work and knowing how to use the different tools in Photoshop. You now have the foundation to really start experimenting and playing around with and using those tools to do all these wild and crazy things in the program. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe for more weekly content. And you can follow my Instagram at SirJohnTheHo for daily updates on my hobby projects. Until next time, happy hobbying.